Now you hear it.
When you're a child, you learn there are 3 dimensions: height, width, and depth, like a shoebox. Then later you hear there's a 4th dimension: time.
From Seattle, we're Drinking the Movies. I'm Taylor Baker.
And I'm Michael Clausen.
Oh, hey, Michael.
Hey, Taylor. How are you?
I'm doing wonderful. The year is 2021. Everything from 2020 is behind us now. Theaters have reopened and the world is beautiful and we can go do anything we want, right?
Overnight, it all just got better, right? Is that what happened?
I think that's what I was waiting for. I was waiting for the opposite of turning into a pumpkin at midnight.
I just closed my eyes. I tried real hard to just imagine everything would just go away and things would be better. And I opened my eyes and it didn't happen.
It didn't. But hey, things aren't that bad. You're in Colorado seeing your folks for the holiday. We had some snow here on Christmas. It's not so bad.
And we have movies to watch and discuss.
Yes, we are rescreening Perfect Blue today. Before we dig into Satoshi Kon's directorial debut, let's go ahead and do a first impression of our next rescreening title, Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West.
The railroad. The boom towns. A new life. And the promised land. Once upon a time. The widow, the land grabber, the outlaw, the gunman. The man in search of a name.
All right, Michael, that was the trailer for Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in the West. What do you think? Your facial expression's what I think.
Well, you'll have to fill me in a little bit on what you just saw because I was having technical difficulties. I didn't hear anything. I got no sound. I think we aligned on which trailer we were watching, but I heard nothing. So I'm going purely off of visuals for this first impression of Once Upon a Time in the West. I don't think I've seen any Sergio Leone movies. I wouldn't describe Westerns, be them American Westerns or spaghetti Westerns, as a genre or kind of film that I naturally gravitate towards. So I'm kind of hoping that by diving into this one, it might broaden my taste a bit if I'm lucky. So I'm hopeful. I'll put it that way. What are you thinking?
Well, I heard it.
There you go.
I have the same lack of familiarity with Leone. You know, the most Leone I've seen is I watch Clint Eastwood movies and I watch Quentin Tarantino movies. I have heard that I believe it was this film, if not a different film. What is his name? Now I had just thought of this point and now I'm forgetting it. He made Yojimbo and Hidden Fortress.
Oh yeah, Kurosawa.
I heard Kurosawa watched like this movie, I believe it was. There was another of Leone's movies, and he said, "That's a good movie. Too bad you copied it."
That's right. I think it's Yojimbo, that there are some like shot for shot remakes. I don't know if it's this one. You're right. I'm not sure if it's this one or maybe if it's Full of Dollars, but yeah, I mean, maybe the homework for this one could involve some Japanese cinema as well.
Hopefully. So I mean, when you're stealing, if you're stealing from the best, I have a feeling I'm going to like it is what I'm trying to get at. I like I said, could hear, and the dialogue is delightful. It's cheesy but serious. This is kind of exactly what I was hoping for without knowing what I was hoping for. So I'm thrilled at the prospect of watching this title. And it's regrettable that you couldn't hear the hilarious sound effects of those guns and those bullets.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened. This is what I get for taking a week off. I'm out of practice.
You don't even know how to watch YouTube anymore.
I know.
Well, all right. That is our first impression for Once Upon a Time in the West, which will be our next rescreening title. Let's talk about Perfect Blue.
誰なの？あなた誰なの？はい、5秒前。4、3、2。
All right, Michael. As I mentioned to you before we started recording, I'm gonna briefly read a quick definition here of the persistence of vision from the Oxford Dictionary of Film Studies. Okay. This is in relation to the early stages of animation and what exactly the technical side of what is occurring is in animation. Persistence of vision is the capacity of the eye to maintain an image on the retina for a moment after the image has disappeared. If successive images follow quickly enough, these will be perceived as a single, continuously moving image. Right? Pretty simple to understand, but when you're doing it with drawing, it's similar, but it's a very different process for the artist because they have to be thinking about what they want moving in the picture, what they want to do with the depth of field, that type of thing. And I'm very excited to talk about one of the best directorial debuts I've ever seen with you in Perfect Blue.
Me too. Yeah. And just to build on that, I mean, I think it's arguably just the foundation of cinema too, right? When you think about those really early kind of like optical toys and devices where you just spin something and, with some cutouts on a wheel, you would see something move. Exactly. Same idea.
Same base principle.
Yeah. But yeah, I think from your introduction, it's safe to say you enjoyed this film. Is that correct?
Yes, I think I did enjoy it, at least the first time. I did watch it for the second time this morning, right before we started recording, and it's still great. But it's kind of like saying you love Black Swan. A little. You can only love that. What I'll say is you can't love some of the scenes that occur in this film, most notably the rape scene. It's very affecting, at least for me. It was very gauche.
Yeah. You mentioned Black Swan. Perhaps we could start by saying that I was not very familiar at all with Satoshi Kon before diving into Perfect Blue, but it doesn't take much more than a simple Google search of his name to see just how influential of a director he was, especially on directors like Darren Aronofsky and Christopher Nolan. Those are like the two you just see listed in article after article when you read about Satoshi Kon.
I particularly, as I was watching Paprika more than any of the others, what I was thinking about Mother and just how the duality of a single character can be played with, even in live action.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny that just in our first impression of Once Upon a Time in the West, we were talking about shot for shot remakes of things. You can very easily find on YouTube some shots out of Requiem for a Dream, I think, and maybe Black Swan as well, where Aronofsky is basically just doing kind of shot for shot variations on stuff out of Perfect Blue. He clearly enjoyed it as well.
Yes. So I'll just share a mini aside that I think is at least a fun anecdote. Tell me if you agree with me. When I was a child, I enjoyed cartoons. I remember somewhere between 9 and 12 watching Princess Mononoke and some of the other Ghibli stuff that was really, really cutting edge, as well as the Animatrix, and Linkin Park had started releasing some of their anime style music videos. And I remember at that age just wondering why they still made normal movies when it was so clear that animation could supersede everything you would want to do in a normal film because of these expert examples. And this is one of the movies that I'd never seen as a child that just, to me, proves that animation can make better films, depending on what the subject matter is, than a real live shot film.
Yeah, even at 10 years old, you suspected that this was perhaps the height of the medium.
Well, it was more like a selfishness of like, why isn't everything a cartoon? This is clearly the best thing I've ever seen. Why are we settling for things that aren't the best thing I've ever seen?
Yeah. I mean, I think Princess Mononoke was probably the first anime movie I ever saw, and I could not have told you who Satoshi Kon was at the time. I don't think I knew that name at all, but I think he very much deserves to be talked about in the same regard, even though they have very different interests, I think.
Yes.
Not that I have seen that much Miyazaki, but
Kon's been acquired by G Kids, which, that's Ghibli's distribution essentially here in America now as well. So I do think that they are, more than ever part of the same discussion in America, because from our perspective, it's just Japanese anime.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah, it's kind of tragic to compare because I don't know how many movies Miyazaki made, but it feels like there were a lot, like 10 plus, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he made more than 4.
Maybe,
and Kon only got to
exactly.
make 4 before he passed.
Yeah, I think I read he passed away in 2010, and arguably it seems like he might have had a lot left in him. He was arguably just getting going, which is really sad.
What was his last film? Was it Paprika?
I think it was Paprika, in like 2006 or so. Or mid 2000s.
It definitely feels like he had more to do, because in the interview that he has, it's very brief, like 10-minute interview in the Blu-ray extras for Perfect Blue. They're asking him these questions, and you can tell he thinks that they're stupid questions, but he's trying to like answer them. And no matter what he says, he ends up going down his own philosophical rabbit hole of like the meanings of reality and how there's 2 different versions of the self and all that stuff. And, I think Paprika, he got closer to examining that idea than he did in Perfect Blue, but I think Perfect Blue is a better project. And he himself described Perfect Blue in that interview not as a film, but as an animation project.
Oh, interesting. I like that. And just I guess on the note of animation in general, it really seems to me like his interests overall so well aligned with animation specifically, like this preoccupation with reality versus illusions and dreams and like that just seems so fitting for animation, which is itself an illusion. We just mistake these drawn things for real life people. It just seems like he knew which medium was the right one for his areas of interest.
Yeah, the venues in which he's telling a story. I believe he said his background, or no, he didn't say. The interviewer informed me that his background before animation was painting. So he was a painter, and then he came to anime storytelling. I have to imagine that was probably during the boom that kind of happened after Akira had its high gross, and then everybody wanted action. But yeah, I ended up watching all of his films in the homework for this rescreening. Did you get to anything besides Tokyo Godfathers, which I did see you got to?
I did Tokyo Godfathers. I did Millennium Actress. I haven't done Paprika yet. I will definitely do Paprika. But this is definitely my favorite of the 3 I have seen so far, Millennium Actress being a close second. What about you? Do you have a definitive ranking?
A definitive ranking feels very inarticulate for for but I will say
you don't have to answer.
Tokyo Godfathers is my least favorite, the one that I don't really want to rewatch, but I likely the most likely film that I will rewatch, even though I don't want to, just because it fits with Christmas holidays in the future. But I would say Paprika I preferred over Millennium Actress. I don't know why, but I ended up really respecting that project, but not closely identifying with it. Whereas Paprika, I love it. I think more than I like Perfect Blue, but Perfect Blue is undeniably the best film of his collection here.
And I think he maybe did some TV series as well. I see those on Letterboxd, but just
he
the four
contributed
features seem
to a 360-minute project that had a bunch of directors. I don't know the backstory on that, but that was his first project somewhere in the early 90s, 95, 93, somewhere like that.
Yeah. But yeah, it seems like the acclaim is primarily centered around the features.
Yeah. I mean, this is a film about a pop icon who has a team of agents, and the agency determines that she should become an actress rather than continuing to be a pop star. I think center of Satoshi Kon's film hinges on you believing any of that. And I particularly think that the introduction sequence, which is knockoff Power Rangers, immediately just gets you in the animated world space in a very deft way. He doesn't ever call back to it, but it's just this really sweeping, engaging opening scene that every kid would enjoy, especially. And then we go into that pop concert venue, and the music there, the actual music is so good. It doesn't matter which version you watch. I just watched the Japanese version. Great. It's almost the same exact song, but with Japanese lyrics. The English version, just as great. I can't believe how good that song is that he got to build the film around.
Yeah, and this is only the first, 100 to 200 seconds of the movie that we're talking about. But I think within those two scenes that you're talking about, he's laying out the themes of the movie right off the bat. We're sort of mistaking something unreal for something real, at least within the context of the world of the movie.
Yes.
The Power Rangers turn out to be a performance. We're not actually in the world of Power Rangers. And then during that pop performance, there's that cross-cutting between her on stage, our main character, Mima, and her just kind of going about her life. Like she goes to the groceries, she's on the train.
Getting the moo cow milk. Don't forget about the moo cow milk if you watch the English version.
The fish food. And right off the bat, just that division of the onstage persona versus the private her is laid out right off the bat. This is only a 90-minute movie. I feel like it's very efficient in laying out its themes and lays those two out right away.
Well, it's 80 minutes.
Even shorter. Yeah. There you go. Thanks.
I mean, that is the introduction. This is a film that, like Black Swan, is impossible to talk about without giving away almost the entire film at minimum. But she eventually, you come to understand, has a psychological disorder of some sort in which she's separating two different identities that she views herself through. And that happens after she's renounced her pop image and is focused on becoming an actress. She goes through the first episode of a series that she's a part of, has very minimal lines, and then the writer writes her a part that's more crucial, and the show's going to be about her. But as I mentioned earlier, that rape scene, that brutal rape scene that is also, I think it's one of the most nuanced examinations that I've seen in animation of American cinema, I guess, right? Because it starts out with the discussion. Jodie, what's her name? Did it? Remember?
Jodie Foster?
That's who he wants you to think of. But do you not remember that part where the agent's trying to convince her to do the rape scene while the woman who is very crucial to the plot, the other agent, sitting opposite the table?
Oh, I don't think I remember that line. I thought you were asking me like the actress in our world that also did a rape scene.
So in the film, they're sitting at a table and she's in the middle of them. The quote unquote camera. I'm just going to say camera from here on out. I'm not going to do quote unquotes. The camera is facing her in rear profile, and to her left is the woman who features crucially to the plot as we proceed.
The manager.
And to her right is the other half of the agency there. And he's trying to say that he already told them that she quit being a pop star so that she could be focused on acting, and to her left arguing for not doing the rape scene. And the blow up happens. She convinces her that she's going to do it. And in that sequence, he says, all the actresses that are up and coming do it. Remember, Jodie What's Her Name did it.
I got you.
And it's just this quick allusion to American cinema, which everything is kind of self-referential in Satoshi Kon's filmography, especially in films like Millennium Actress, where it's literally referencing itself. But once you get to that rape scene, the juxtaposition of the cut or the reshoot to the actual scene is just so brutal. I can't think of another animated film that's quite that affecting.
Yeah, and it's kind of amazing just how unsettling that scene is when it is not an actual rape that we are watching. It is a staging of a rape, and it is just as, if not more, upsetting than so many rape scenes you might see in the movies. It's incredibly
and you know
troubling.
What's happening, and you know that all the angles you're seeing are actual fake in the film world cameras that are there for that, and that everything's being acted out. But that doesn't at all allow your brain to not take it seriously for some reason.
Yeah.
He figured out that perfect in between of letting you know that nothing is real while making you feel like everything is real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think as they're staging, as we're getting ready to see the rape scene acted out, you hear some of the guys in the background. I don't think it's the director. Maybe it's just some crew members kind of joking around about it, kind of saying, "Oh, this is going to be good." And I think those lines are kind of crucial in suggesting, that this is all being staged for the pleasure of a male audience. And that's sort of why this becomes a critique of, female celebrities being sexualized, is because it's for the benefit of men and the men watching this stuff. Without those lines, I think Satoshi Kon might risk kind of indulging in what he's criticizing. But I think it's pretty clear that it's for the benefit of these men. All the men you see in the audience at the pop shows. There's not a single woman there. It's all men. That definitely seems to be the kind of thrust of his critique.
I agree mostly, but I do think so. While I agree that the dialogue is absolutely crucial to the point he's making in the critique, the most powerful visual critique that he gives us is the crosscut from the actual rape occurring to the men surrounding her waiting for their turn, and their jeering jowls and the drool and the dribble and just how animalistic they look in those shots. Nothing was quite as affecting as that crosscut to me in that sequence. But the framing of the dialogue certainly gives it the first thrust of that.
Yeah. And there's the agent and the manager who are crying or sweating. I kind of forget what exactly it is they're going through at that moment, but they're clearly
sweating,
queasy by it.
But the manager, she has an emotional breakdown at the end of it. Or the last time we see her, she gets up and is having an emotional breakdown and just rollicking tears, if you will.
Yeah. But just the fact that we kind of get this, we get the scene and then we get the people watching this scene. I think it's kind of important how he kind of lays out this scene between the viewers and the person being viewed, the person being kind of degraded in all of this for the pleasure of others.
Well, that's the third cut, right? When we actually go to the production studio where we're seeing all the monitors with all the different camera angles. Because that's what clues you, the viewer, into knowing all these different close-ups are actual cameras in the film itself. Because before that, you're getting all these angles and you don't know that, because as you mentioned earlier, when Satoshi brings us in, we don't know quite what's real and what isn't real. And this is, one of the reversals of that, which is this is what's not real, but it feels so disturbingly real.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of my favorite shots in the movie is when we first kind of go into that scene and it's that bank of television screens that you're describing, and that it just led me to think kind of about the use of color in the movie and kind of what I felt like were the ideas behind that, because I never really had a great answer for why it was called Perfect Blue. And I still don't really have one, but there's so many rather than primary colors. There are all these secondary colors in the movie. There are these pinks and purples, and not usually just true blues or true reds. Even like the blood when people are being murdered is sometimes looks more purple than red. But I kind of like the idea that some of these colors are what you get when you mix two different colors, like red and blue. You get more of a pinkish or purple. So that was at least my own personal rationalization for why some of these visuals were fitting with content. It's all these kind of in between colors to match with these kind of divided, mixed states of being for Mima. But it's beautiful looking while horrifying too.
I like that, the in between, because that's exactly what the film is. It's in between. I had meant to try to look up what the God, what is that? Now I'm forgetting what the term for the history of word etymological. I'd meant to look up the etymology behind the words perfect and blue in Japanese, and I just never got there. But for me, it's something like a melancholy. The word blue here, I'm sure I also describes color, but I was thinking more about the melancholia of it, and that aspect. And then I just kind of gave up on trying to make sense of it and just went with it's a perfect name for a movie that probably can't have a perfect name.
I completely agree. I would not explain it any more complexly than that. I like it.
So I accidentally used the word juxtaposition earlier before I needed to use it, because I need to use it a lot. All right.
Do it.
So Perfect Blue is a juxtaposition of the story of Mima, who was a pop star and is now attempting to become an actress. The show that she is cast in is a NCIS type of a show about a murder series sequence, and the show ends up, depending on how it's cut and edited in, you don't know if you're watching reality or if you're watching her shoot scenes for the show. And the show reality ends up becoming more and more enmeshed, if you will, with the actual reality, seemingly by chance, until you come to understand the real reason for why what's happening occurs. The first scenes of threat, I believe, are after she it might happen before she does the rape scene, but I think right after the rape scene, she gets a fax from someone hating her. But before that, at some point, there's a letter that explodes. And you're introduced to this new possibility of everyone around her dying, seemingly because they're associated with her, and you don't know why. And the constant, once again, juxtaposition back and forth between that show and the show's plot and character and reality is really something. And anecdotally, just outside of that, because I'd watched Millennium Actress before that, I kept getting confused that the actress in the show was the actress who was the older actress in Millennium Actress.
Oh, I thought about the exact same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I had to separate the tangents in my head. Like, those are two different movies, man. It's not the same actress.
Well, yeah. And exactly, because even within Millennium Actress, there is the main character whose story we're following, which is the elderly actress who's telling us about her career in the cinema.
I'm not talking about her. I'm talking about the other actress.
Who she's like acting with. And it's kind of like she's kind of
who hates her and steals
with.
the coin or whatever.
Exactly. And then within Perfect Blue, we get Mima and this other girl. Very confusing. Why must you do this, Satoshi Kon? And confuse us so badly?
I would love to know if they are the same person.
I can empathize with your confusion.
So that is a very poor introductory idea to the convergence of a couple of realities. Separately, when we start the film, as you mentioned, there are lots of men. There is also a man who tends to have one eye covered by his hair, and then one eye exposed, and he is in the early shot attempting to possess her visually. He's holding his hand up to his eye, and she's dancing in the distance, but the way that he lines it up is essentially she's dancing on his hand. We don't get to we don't see it first from that perspective, I don't think. I think we do end seeing that, though. And he comes to be kind of the fulcrum for who we think is perpetuating these crimes. The camera certainly wants us to believe that.
Yeah, and I think that might be just the look of that character might be one aspect of the movie I don't appreciate quite as much. Doesn't bother me a great deal, but he does have this kind of grotesque. He looks vaguely deformed. The face of this
his
of this
eyes
stalker
are very wide set. Additionally, the actual villain has eyes that are very wide set.
Yeah. Which I don't know. To me, I mean, I think you could argue it's a little cheap to just deform the character to make him a little more grotesque, a little more scary. I don't know that I appreciate that quite so much. But yeah, that is what it is. I think that character's relationship with Mima is maybe one of the more straightforward sort of ideas of the movie, and his just sort of obsession, seemingly perhaps. Yeah. He just the idea that he is the obsessive fan who wants his idol preserved in a certain way forever, and he kind of fetishizes this youthful image that she once had and is maybe relinquishing.
So I don't think I read it the same, because remember, the actual perpetrator of these crimes is maintaining a website that claims to be the real Mima, that is telling the real story of the real truth. And you see him on his computer believing that he's reading the real, the true Mima. Right? So he thinks that she is a different person. So I don't think that it's just that I seemingly agree with most of your points, but I will say that there's a separate reinforcement in the world in which she is self-reporting, even though it's not her, that she is being abused and stuff. And that is, I think, what makes him go further than he would have otherwise.
I guess I thought he was upset and troubled by the fact that she was tarnishing her image, right? Isn't that what he screams at her for?
He was and is, but the person who incepted those ideas potentially would be our actual villain, who's writing website posts about the writer forcing her to do things and be raped and stuff, and that's not the real her. The real her is this other thing, right? Because it's this other demented character who's writing these website posts that is creating that false definition that this person is then believing. I'm not saying that he wasn't delusional before that, but I'm saying these specific delusions he bought into weren't his own invention.
Yeah, I think I follow you. Maybe I might have suggested that the idea that he is or represents the obsession of fans, obsessive fandom, is not necessarily something that the movie thinks is wrong or villainous. Just he does not turn out to ultimately be the perpetrator, but he is so obsessive that he is susceptible to manipulation. Is maybe the better way to put it. Yeah.
Yes, there we agree. It's just about the nuance, because I don't think that was his point, that these rabid fans end up always doing that. It's kind of this externalizing of form. And now we'll really spoil things, I guess. So if you went this far and we're thankful that we didn't spoil the entire film, then you should stop listening now, because we're going to spoil the entire film. All right, I hope you turned it off. Okay, so there is the manager, as you were saying, and at some point, I've watched it twice now. I still don't know exactly when the breaking point is. She has a split personality, quote unquote, and begins to imagine herself as Mima.
Mm-hmm.
And she's the one that sends the faxes. She's the one that sends the letter that explodes. She's the one that is maintaining the website we were just talking about. And I was not prepared for that in my first watch. How about you?
I was not either. It seemed like it was pretty clear who the perp was, and it was not her.
They really led me to it.
Yeah. And I think I saw some responses saying that the movie is in part leading you to think that it might be Mima committing these crimes, and it is her, the other side of her.
That was my read.
I actually was pretty sure it was just the villainous dude. I think I fell for the most obvious one here. But on second viewing, I was like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense that she is the other suspect. You almost kind of have a variety of suspects in a way.
Well, what did you end up thinking when you saw her pop idol reflection in the train window?
Well, I guess I did not necessarily think that, oh, it must be her committing these crimes. I guess I
didn't think that. Yeah. I didn't think it. Oh, it must be. But I was like, is it? You know?
Yeah, I was. Yeah, mostly just thinking about the fact that she is haunted by this choice she's made to let go of one image and take up another. And for me, that's one of the more relatable themes of the movie, because so much of it is about celebrity, which, surprise, surprise, I cannot really relate to that. But I think anyone, yeah, I think anybody can relate to the idea of just having some regret about whether or not you made the right choice and moving on from one thing and into another.
Yes.
And just feeling like you're haunted by that choice, and you'll never know if maybe that was the wrong move. I think that's very relatable.
Yeah. So right before that, we were talking about what we actually thought. And I think that the greatest thing about this film in particular, and a little bit of Paprika as well, is that Satoshi Kon doesn't try to make you think this is who it is too purposefully. You know, there's the one character that we mentioned with the side set eyes, but for me, what he's constantly postulating is the question, is it? Mm-hmm. And that's a big difference between is it and I think it is. And then, you know, whatever you want to say, it is the wall, it is the knife, it is the screwdriver in the eyeball exploding the blood. The question is it? Who is it? Is it maybe her? Is it maybe him? Is that person in on it? And the constant conflation of, is it, both in terms of the reality that we're experiencing and who's perpetrating these crimes, is so deft. You know, there's really very few projects. I think the only other thing that does at this level for me the same principle is Steven Soderbergh's limited series and app Mosaic.
Interesting. That's one I still got to see.
Well, you heard it here, folks. Rescreening Mosaic.
That'll be a long one. Yeah, and I watched it twice as well. Did you watch it more than twice, or just 2 times?
Just 2 times. I watched it once last year, and then I watched it. And the first time I watched it was in English, and then I watched it this year in Japanese, just to get the differences. I do think that for your first viewing, you should go with whatever your native language is, just so you can appreciate the animation. But the second time, I really wanted to pick up the distinctions between how things kind of feel more serious versus not so serious. There's certain dialogue in the English version that is very bad. There's no other way to put it. The dialoguing with the mom on the phone is a particularly horrendous scene in English, and it works slightly better in Japanese. There's very few problems with this film, but that's one of my major ones.
Yeah. So I watched it twice as well, and on first viewing, I was pretty sure it was the obvious suspect, the creepy dude, and then was surprised to discover it was the manager, but really wasn't I didn't have a great explanation for why he decided to make this person the villain. And, obviously she is crazy. That is kind of the answer. But I thought, well, thematically, maybe there's a better reason to make it the obsessive fan, the perp, right? Because that is, you could argue, obsession is what drives him there. But on second viewing, I guess I moved a little closer to some of the earlier conversations where the manager Rumi is talking about having once been a pop idol herself.
Yes.
And how pop idols are falling out of favor now. They don't have mass appeal. It's the phrase they use. And this is the better path forward for Mima, is to become an actress. And I guess I kind of hypothesize, if I can just hypothesize about the character, that it's potentially invalidating to her for what she once was to be falling out of favor. And she's kind of doing this, living vicariously through Mima, with Mima having been a pop star herself. And that's what has sort of that is partly what Rumi took pride in. I think that's something that kind of destroys her, to watch what she once was being left behind by her client, her closest client. That was my explanation for something beyond just the fact that she's just crazy, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's super complex. I don't know that I have a specific definition of exactly what caused it, but I would say that the cursory value is she's in denial about who and what she is. And this is a way for her to reclaim the way that she wants to see herself. Now, I don't know what the source of the reason is for why she wants to see herself that way, or why she doesn't like herself now, or any, but it's definitely one of, for me, it was character choice built in denial of reality.
Yeah. I think you spend so much of this movie sympathizing with Mima. I think that sympathy ultimately is transferred a bit to that character. Once that revelation is done, I think it is a thriller, but I think it's a very sympathetic movie towards the people in these positions and their kind of tortured sense of identities. Yeah,
there's a choice that Satoshi makes at the end. I guess we should do the legwork to get there. Essentially, a lot of people have been murdered by someone, and then she defends herself and murders the fellow with the wide set eyes as he attempts to rape her, in the same exact scene where she was being raped, or in the same setting where she was playing being raped, for the television show. And then through a series of circumstances, ends up being chased by Rumi at night. And Rumi gets the wig knocked off of her, and then bends over glass, and it penetrates the skin, and she's slowly bleeding out, ostensibly to die. Everything about the animation language, the chase scene, the dread, the terror of Satoshi's vision here is a death scene, and you just don't know for who that happens. Then she runs out in the middle of the road, a truck is coming, everything screams death. And then he makes, I think, the boldest choice, and he has Mima save Rumi. And not only does he have her save Rumi, he has her come visit her at a mental institution at the very end of the film. And that completely changes the film in ways that I have a very hard time explaining, but are the fulcrum for why I think this is a great film, not a good one, and for why this is a 5, not a 4.
Yeah, I love the chase scene, and I think it's partly because if I remember it correctly, at the start of the chase scene, it's not like Mima realizes who it is necessarily and is totally lucid and saying to herself, I'm not crazy, you're crazy. I think she's still a little delusional at that point. So the idea that across this whole chase, both the person being chased and the one doing the chasing are confused in who they even think they're looking at. Mima thinks she's being chased by maybe Rumi, but maybe it's still this ghost image of herself, and Rumi is obviously out of her mind. So then when Mima saves Rumi from being hit by the truck, it's like, what part of her is saving Rumi versus saving perhaps this image of her former self? I think that all plays beautifully.
And building on that, the very end, you never have a scene where she is seeing a psychoanalyst and processing grief and her mental stuff. At the end, my takeaway was Rumi is someone who's delusional and a threat to others, and Mima is someone who is delusional and isn't a threat to others. And the line between that is a very perfect blue line.
Very sharply defined.
Man, what a film! I mean, where do you want to go? Let's talk about more. I just don't know where to go.
Well, one other thing I like about it is I think it's aged particularly well, and is now just this really great kind of encapsulation of the dawn of the internet era.
Yes.
And I think that's part of what makes Mima so sympathetic, is her innocence in relation to the burgeoning web and technology. You know, it's almost a funny scene now when Rumi's explaining to her how to get on the web, and all she says is, you double click an icon. You know, from the perspective of 2020, it's so innocent, it's so simple. And the idea that, you know, maybe celebrities have always had to deal with people paying attention to their private lives and that kind of thing, but that this girl has no idea how it is about to be not just scrutinized, her private life, but it's also about to be shared everywhere all the time. Which makes it so much more tragic.
It's Rumi setting it up, which is what makes it so insidious on the second viewing, because that's your first. That should, you know, for if you're, you know, if you've read your Agatha Christie, Poirot would say the first thing that you should realize is the only other person that could have touched the computer is the person who's the suspect. And for some reason, I just didn't think that, right?
yeah, exactly.
It just went right past me. It was that's such a crucial scene. I think one of the most intricate things about Satoshi Kon's animation in Perfect Blue, and I believe in general, though Tokyo Godfathers has a little bit less of this, is how well defined and well lived in these animated characters' actual rooms are. They're very thought through. They're very intricate. They're very elaborate. There's incredible amounts of nuance. I know that people love CGI that's modern and stuff, but even if you take a great one like Soul or Inside Out and you compare the details of the bedrooms between that and a Satoshi Kon film, there's just so many more layers to the wallpaper being worn, or the paint being faded and having droplets, and the shadows cast by different books that are set different ways on bookshelves. It's the most intricate I've ever seen of a bedroom.
Yeah, totally. I totally forgotten about that, actually. And I didn't even really pick up on it on first viewing, how Mima, you know, comes home one day and sees that her fish have died, and then later sees that her fish are alive again. And a poster she had torn down is back up on the wall, and it's Rumi who's sort of reviving this side of Mima. But I thought, well, those are the two obvious ones. I'm sure there's other production, it's tempting to call it production design, other detail within this room that I'm probably not even noticing, that is, you know, being restored to how the original Mima had it. So one more reason to watch it a third time. Yeah, the pure Mima, exactly. Another reason to watch it again.
Well, I mean, that's great. Yeah, Mima, but even her the television writer, there's a close-up on the writer at one point where he's sitting at his desk. I think he's on a phone call with one of the with the agent, who's a man, and behind him are these just a bookshelf with books sideways, and there's like dust on certain books, and there's dust on the top corners of like the bookshelf. It's this incredibly intricate design that I've just never seen at that level before. This is really, an artist. This is a directorial debut of the highest caliber that I can think of, since maybe, we've had Hereditary since then and a few other great ones, but this is really something.
Yeah. And just on the topic of craft, I was totally oblivious to some edits and cuts on first viewing, which really just kind of go over my head in animation. I don't my mind just doesn't even naturally watch for editing in animation, which is ridiculous. But there's some really striking edits, some match cuts. Like there's this scene where Mima goes to the agency and she sees the two former members, or the two girls she was in the trio with, and they're celebrating a hot single that they put out. And she has this flashback, to when they were nervous about their future. And
but that's the thing. It's okay. So they're celebrating and they're pulling the poppers, and she's standing there getting something. And the way that you edit out of that, it seems like she was having a flashback. But that's not clearly defined, which, at least in the first viewing, lets you wonder if she's imagining herself as still part of the group.
Very possible. Yeah. And you're right. Whether it's a flashback or a hallucination, I guess, or something like that, she gets kind of clapped on the shoulder, and you don't even know whose arm it is, if it's somebody in the flashback or if it's the agent who's standing right there, just because of where the edit is placed. Just the idea of that ambiguity being put into those cuts is really cool. On
top of that cut, think of how that scene is framed. That scene is framed from her perspective, and she can only see through a doorway to the other office, where she can see one girl in full profile, and then she can only see the edge of another girl. She can't see the man who's talking, and you don't know if there's a third girl in there or not. And there's just so much intricacy to the choices he made in animating that, because like I was saying earlier, it's not a question of this is it. It's a question of, is it this constantly? And the editing is the fulcrum for why I keep asking myself, is it this? Is it this? Is it this? Just keep getting led and led and led. And I don't know what reality is and what reality isn't. And but it's deft enough to keep me going. That great scene where she's running away from a guy who asked her if she signed, and then catches up to her to be a model. And then all of a sudden you zoom out from the monitor that is showing you the image that the camera's capturing for the TV show. That's just so deft. Like I had assumed we were at another grocery store scene, walking across crosswalks. I had no clue that was the television show at the time. Yeah.
And I'll give one more, and you can keep going if you'd like to too. It's when she first sees, I think, this image of her former self, and she's on the train, and we get a lot of those great shots on the train where we see the reflection of herself in the mirror, and another train passes by, a second train, and it wipes away her current image and it replaces it with the pop idol image who just says one line or something like that, and then the next train comes by and wipes that one away. Just great stuff. Love it.
I think Satoshi might like trains. What do you think?
Probably. There's a lot of good training.
It's a little bit crucial for the Tokyo Godfathers.
Oh yeah. That's true.
That's probably as good a place to end it as any. Do you have a favorite scene, Michael?
Boy, that's hard. That was actually one I was leaning towards, was just that first vision of Mima's former self, because that just caught me off guard. I'll go with that one. That really is kind of one of my favorite images of the movie. I think it's just so beautifully concise, and the color is so great when that train comes by. That's up there. What about you?
That's incredibly hard. I'm going to say that whatever I say right now is not empirically or objectively correct. It's just what I'm saying right now. And what I'm going to go with is the entire sequence where she walks into a room and doesn't know why it's just like her room or who's maintaining that room.
Mm.
And then someone bursts in and a fight ensues, and she has to try to get from one side of the porch to another. It's a very deft sequence, perfect tone management, and it leads up to that great chase scene. But I think that the amount of mystery that you walk into that room with on your first viewing, and the amount of confusion you have, and then everything just bursts at the seams. I think it's an eloquent and excellent punctuation mark to the beginning of the end of the film.
I'm right there with you.
All right. That is Rescreening Perfect Blue. We'll be back next month with Once Upon a Time in the West from Sergio Leone.
And that's another one in the can.
Now you don't.